Who are we waiting on? We're all set? I'm just going to hold for a sec. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Today is October 26, 2021. We are at a regular city council meeting. It is 7:01 p.m. We did have an earlier meeting today, a special city council meeting, which was a closed session. Otherwise, I will call this meeting to order. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're in section 4, citizens to be heard. If citizens would like to be heard, please come up to the podium. We do ask that you fill out a form with your name so that we have that for our records. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi. Do I need to leave this on while I'm talking? Can you hear me with it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm Sarah Malnikoff with Moab Solutions, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the recycling we did at the Street Fest on October 9th. There was a little bit of a misunderstanding about it at the last meeting when we had sent a PowerPoint. So there was no plan at all for recycling at that event. And thanks to Liz, we worked with her, Liz Holland at the Mark, and in less than 24 hours, we ascertained how many containers they would need, who the vendors were, got a few extra bins for them, set everything up. I hired staff, one person to help me. Lenore Beeson let us use her driveway as a staging area for all the stuff. And we recycled, I think, about 480 aluminum cans, 30 gallons of mixed glass, 15 gallons of mixed paper, 20 gallons of number 1 plastic, a big stack of corrugated cardboard, assorted tin cans, and number 2 plastic containers. Had we not done that, the dumpster would have had half again as much as it ended up having. Had we been able to work with staff from the beginning, we could have diverted a lot more by working with the vendors and trying to get them to use different containers and things of that nature. We are hoping that the city, in living up to their lofty goals for sustainability, will not forget that recycling is a vitally, vitally misunderstood activity. It creates jobs, lowers air and water pollution, protects untouched land by providing raw materials for new products, diverts materials from rapidly filling landfills across the country, and most importantly, it teaches simple respect for the earth, which gives us everything we need to survive. And it's a very easy activity anyone can do. The bonus is we have a source-separated recycle center here, which is vitally important because we know where everything's going. We know most of it stays in the state of Utah, and it gets remade into things. We're hoping the city would consider, instead of a checkbox that you might recycle, make it a requirement that people recycle. The burden will be spread across everyone, the community will be cleaner, and we'll be setting a really good example for the rest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Other citizens to be heard? Welcome, Jane.
I learned something the last time. Give it to her first. My name is Jane May. I'm a 40-year resident. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Actually, we should be aware of victims of violence every month, every day. But I ask you all to join me before I begin my statement tonight to stand in a moment of silence to honor those victims who do not have the voice to tell us their stories and who are important and essential members of our community nonetheless. Please stand. Thank you.
Thank you.
To begin my comments to you 1 month ago, I began my comments 1 month ago with the African proverb, "You cannot heal what you conceal." And now in returning tonight to speak, Mayor Niehaus, Acting City Manager Carly Castle, Mike, Ronnie, Tawny, Karen, Kaylin. Your silence and your lack of any humane outreach in response to my previous words is deafening. And yet it speaks volumes about intention. To be essentially ghosted by the very leaders who should have been incensed and appalled, I am left dumbfounded to imagine what will move you to act, if not the weight of accumulating victim stories and events. Whose safety and justice do you serve? The community of Moab and its victims? Or Chief Edge? Now, 16 months later, I am still without an answer from the city to my formal complaint against Chief Edge, one that contains the questions and issues with his leadership failures that are now playing out on a national stage in our heart-wrenching stories. A complaint that earmarked every issue back in 2019 and 2020, especially violations to violence against women. But the difference is that I'm alive, and I can speak to the systematic failures firsthand and with documentation. Maybe I was too sanitized in my last explanation to the life-threatening violence I experienced, or the comparisons were too vague for you to act differently than to protect the chief. So now I'll take my chances with further ramifications and further personal risk in order to offer you more details of the events that are contained in my July 1st, 2020 formal complaint. At the end of March 2019, then Moab Police Department Chief Jim Winder placed me, my husband, our daughter, and our young grandson in a safe house after I received a recorded threat to my life by a felon in this community. Chief Winder kept us there until a protective order could be secured for us through the courts. Even with the protective order in place, Chief Winder was reluctant to release us back to our homes, but he did so with the warning to me that from today onward, Jane, your life has forever changed and will never be the same again. That I needed to fully embrace this fact in order to remain safe. He promised that his Moab officers would remain close to this felon, but his description of exactly how close may be a little too colorful for tonight to repeat. In August of 2019, 5 months later, with Brett Edge now as Moab Chief of Police, that same felon violently beat his best friend in an unprovoked event that was so severe it hospitalized the victim, who eventually left Moab. The felon was placed on a pretrial release. Then late in the night on September 19th, 2019, just 1 month after that beating and 5 months after the first threat to my life, this felon leaves his Moab residence, and behind him, an 8-page murder-suicide note that states, "Jane must die. She is evil." He is armed with a 9mm semi-automatic weapon and 202 rounds of ammunition, now heading to my home to kill me. All the while, my husband and I slept unaware and without warning from authorities about this approaching danger. When Moab police officers located his hidden backpack after he ran off the road halfway to my home, the gun it contained held a full magazine clip and a bullet was chambered. On the next morning, September 20th, 2019, just hours after that felon's arrest, Chief Edge closed my case without conducting a full investigation of the prior evening's crimes that I was still unaware had even happened. It took over a week before Chief Edge finally returned my phone call. In our first call, he refused to reopen the case, citing it was not his jurisdiction. And yet, if not his, then why could he refuse to investigate? Why could he open it and then close it? I remained desperate for protection and without an investigation before my case went to trial, but Chief Edge was over and done with the crimes of that night only hours after their unfolding. As Chief Edge's endangering certainties continue to affect my life and safety to this day, doesn't it concern anyone at the city, leaders or administrators, for example, that your chief of police was not interested, concerned, or committed to finding out where a felon acquired a gun and 200 rounds of ammunition that was intended to murder me? That within 6 months window of time, the felon's violence was rapidly escalating from verbally threatening me to a violent and brutal beating of someone else, and then to attempting to commit a premeditated murder of me. That the only person who was interviewed by Moab City Police Department about the attempted murder was the perpetrator himself before Chief Edge was finished, closing my case without questioning the victim, reporting party, or others involved. Well, it concerns me. In mid-October 2019, after so many traumatic hits against Chief Edge's brick walls, I took my beggings to Mayor Niehaus and her administrator in hopes that she would compel her chief of police to investigate this crime before it was too late for my case before Judge Torgerson. We met, heard platitudes and assurances, but nothing was done to demand Chief Edge's to take action on my case, and we left empty-handed without a Moab City Police Department investigations. What is the city's pattern here? Just like Chief Edge's refusal, now some 16 months later, Moab City and its administrator refused to answer my formal complaint with any meaningful and fair investigation. You all are bystanders who could have done so much these last 2 years to address issues that plague victims in this community today, and yet your energies are spent protecting your chief and his flawed system and leadership. What a legacy your administration has left for this precious and once peaceful community. A treasure tarnished by disinformation, inaction, and mistrust when we think of what Moab has become. I believe that the mayor summed it up best when my husband asked her why Chief Edge refused to show up to a meeting with us that he was expected to attend, and her reply to Mitchell was that Chief Edge admitted he really messed up handling things, and she thought he was probably afraid to be confronted by us about his mistakes. Understanding the feelings of her chief at the expense of me as an endangered person defines why Judge Torgerson was compelled to speak from the bench about justice and failures of leadership in Moab. No one is accountable when no one is responsible. One of the best predictors of the level of violence that a community will experience is based on the level of violence it tolerates. A reason for this is that offenders have learned to game the system, how to play the police with their demeanor and befriending behaviors, and how little the costing is because so often victims go to court empty-handed. Like most everyone in our community, I never dreamed of the kind of danger that has become a constant traveling companion in my life. Chief Winder was so right in his counsel that my life and what I took as a given here was never going to be the same again. You cannot heal what you conceal. How many more events have to happen here before you admit the failures and make the essential changes that restore our safety, our healing, and our trust? Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Happy.
Thank you. These are for the council. There's some, what I would call exhibits. I don't know what normal humans call them. But some documents. So, my name is Happy Morgan. I am a citizen of Moab, and I have a business here, a law practice, and I own a house here, and I live here. And I'm here to talk to you about similar issues to what Jane has just spoken about. Last month, as you know, I was here and I asked the question, how long does Jane have to wait to have her citizen complaint resolved? And that was not a rhetorical question. And as you all know, 4 weeks have passed and not one person in this room who has a sworn duty to stand up for and protect and tend to the citizens has reached out to her. She has not received an email. She has not received a phone call. She has not received an update. Nothing. Not one word from anyone here. There's some facts I'd like to put on the record in light of that, and some matters I want to clarify. After Jane and I spoke last month, Ms. Castle spoke afterwards, and she told you that Jane's complaint was open. Well, of course it's open. It's unresolved. It's not been tended to, and it's not been handled in accordance with the city policy and procedure of the police department. The city policy and procedure requires that the complainant will be treated courteously and in a professional manner. I can't imagine that anyone could argue that she has been treated courteously or with any professionalism over the last 16 months. The city policy requires that the member conducting the review of the complaint should provide the complainant with periodic updates. That has not happened. Another policy violation. It also requires that the investigation proceed with due diligence, and certainly 16 months later, that has not happened. All good law enforcement agencies have citizen complaint policies. These policies are designed to discover problems when they are small so that they can be addressed and corrected before they get big, before somebody gets hurt. They are designed to keep the community safer and to promote trust between the citizens and the police. A citizen complaint policy allows citizens to know that someone is policing the police. But to have a citizen complaint policy and not follow it, and to pretend it is being followed, and to mislead the citizens about that, that's despicable behavior, and that is what we have seen here. So, looking back to June 23rd, 2020, I remember that date well. I regularly tune in and listen to the city council meetings over YouTube, and Brett Edge did a presentation to you, the city council, and also to the citizens. And during that presentation, he informed you and the public that he had an excellent citizen complaint policy and that he was actively tracking the results and that the process was done on a spreadsheet, and he was doing a very good job of that. Frankly, given the experience that I had had with Jane, trying to be heard for the year before that, I was incredulous to that claim. So, wanting to do my due diligence, I did a government records request to see this spreadsheet. And of course, in keeping with the lack of transparency and lack of proper compliance with the grandma rules, the government records laws, Brett Edge and his office manager rejected my request to see those spreadsheets. Lawful compliance with the grandma laws would have had them redact names where appropriate, but still send the spreadsheets that he told you that he had to me as requested. 1 week after he spoke here on June 23rd and made these statements to the council about his excellent citizen complaint policy, Jane submitted her citizen complaint policy pursuant to the policy that he was touting on that evening. And here we are today, 60 months later, with no response. Imagine if the city had done its due diligence in July and August of 2020 and actually addressed Jane's complaint in a professional manner. Imagine if they took her carefully articulated list of policy violations, obvious training needs and errors, and actually did some corrective action. or retraining, or actually held the chief and others accountable for not following the rules, laws, and their own policy. Where might we be now? As it stands, we have the chief out on leave, posting mountain biking pictures to his Twitter account. We have the police department officer manager, also out on leave, and simultaneously under investigation by the State Bureau of Investigation for improper actions in her capacity as the police department office manager. We have the Weber County Sheriff's Department investigating 2 other Moab police officers for policy and chest camera violations. And we have the Price Police Department investigating the mishandling of the August 12th matter that brought the problems at the Moab Police Department into the national spotlight. And then we have emails from the city manager's office from April and July of this year purporting to have sent Jane's citizen complaint to the West Valley Police Department for them to do an investigation of her citizen complaint. When in fact, that wasn't what was really going on. What was really going on was the city manager's office was attempting to pass Jane's complaint to an off-duty West Valley City police officer with a problematic reputation for covering up for fellow officers who has a private PI business on the side, and then paying with tax dollars that off-duty cop to create a purchased opinion, all at the expense of the taxpayers, but also at the expense of transparency and at the expense of the purported goal of getting a neutral third-party opinion. And let's not overlook the June 2021 hiring of Officer Gist in clear violation of the city police hiring policy that reads the department will recruit and hire only those individuals who demonstrate a commitment to service and who possess the traits and characteristics that reflect personal integrity and high ethical standards. We have now become the police department that, in the name of diversity, according to statements made by Ms. Church, hires somebody recently fired by the state of Utah for his Facebook rantings about hating people not like him, hating people of color, hating people who immigrate to this country, hating people who are Native American, hating people who are of different religions than his, and hating people who don't agree with his thoughts on our previous president. The state fired him.
Happy, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, please.
I'm almost finished.
Thank you.
And I think given the 16 months she's waited, that perhaps it would be appropriate to hear me out. Okay. The state fired him for being unworthy of the trust needed to be a peace officer. And we welcomed him here with open arms. We gave him a gun. We gave him a police car. We gave him a taser and handcuffs, and probably a hefty sign-on bonus, only to have it blow up in spectacular fashion when he made the Salt Lake News for using profanities on the last day of his work here. The gist matter, all under the shadows of your mayor, your 2020 proclamation about the death of George Floyd and the city's commitment to creating a race-neutral department. And I have attached in the packet his termination letter from Adult Probation and Parole, where he was a sworn officer and was terminated for the reasons I've listed above and others. So, as Jane has said, this is your legacy. Everyone here has been on notice. Mayor, you have known about the problems at the police department at least since September of 2019. And the council has been aware at the very least since the summer of 2020. I know this because I personally kept you in the loop through email correspondence about these issues. I did this to create a paper trail, but I also did this because I actually thought that somebody would care enough to take action and do the right thing. And that has not happened. I have a mailbox at home and a porch full of flyers from people who are running for office. And everybody says that they're going to have transparency and accountability. And I'm sure when you electeds ran, whenever you ran, you made those same claims. But that has not come to fruition here. Hiding these problems will create an atmosphere where they will only get worse. This matter won't fix itself, and it will continue to fester and get worse unless the grown-ups in the room take charge and do what is, in fact, their duties. I've created a packet of documents that...
Does this packet include correspondence from us to you as well?
Who's us?
City staff and council? Okay.
Yes, and it includes the APMP letter terminating gist that is a matter of public record. It was gathered by news agencies through the Government Records Agency Management Act. Pictures from Brett Edge's Twitter account so that we all know that he's out mountain biking. Well, we have all these problems going on. And the July 23rd email letter that I sent to every single council person and the mayor, laying out all of the problems with Jane's complaint when it was a year old and saying, please do something, and nobody responded to that. So, you know, I'm certain none of you like having me here, but I didn't want to come here either. I sent that letter on, July 13 or 23rd, I don't know, it's in the packet. But I hoped that somebody would do the right thing, and that just hasn't happened.
Happy, I'm grateful that you came tonight to speak. Thank you.
Summer, do you want these?
Thank you, Happy. Other citizens to be heard? Welcome, Jason.
I don't want to follow that. If I could just say really quickly, as I've been out campaigning, you know, and knocking doors, this has probably been the number one topic that's come up. So I would just hope that you guys would realize that as citizens of Moab, it's coming up all the time. And I think that the other people that are running can probably agree. And it is a very serious thing that I hope can get fixed. What I'm hearing about is the ADU, and that you guys are potentially voting on tonight. One thing is, as I was reading over the ADU, that kind of caught my interest, and I wanted to kind of discuss with you guys, is that with the ADU coming up, that you could have an ADU of any size, basically, as long as it conformed with the property lines and everything like that. And the one thing that kind of stuck out with the ADU is that only one parking space was required for any size ADU. And so as you guys are looking at these ADUs that are going to be in neighborhoods, and if someone were to put like a 2,500 square foot ADU in the neighborhood and have, 8 employees or 8 people who are working full time, that's a possibility of 8 cars that are going to be one in that designated parking spot and 7 in the streets. And so I would ask that you guys would maybe look at changing that, maybe doing like 1 parking spot per 900 square feet, or something like that, so that we don't have cars going down the streets. Because as you guys know, there's a lot of sidewalks. There's not a lot of sidewalks in town, and if there's a lot of cars parking along residential areas, it does become a danger for kids, families, runners, people out walking and stuff. So I'd just like for you guys to really consider, vehicles and how many people and cars when you're doing that. And that's all I have. So.
Thank you, Jason. Other citizens to be heard? Okay. We will move on to our next item on the agenda, Section 5, Administrative Reports, 5.1, Acting City Manager Updates.
Hi, good evening. A pretty quick update tonight. Just letting everyone know, you probably heard that storm come through town last night, and our crews were out really early clearing that up. And I just wanted to thank Levi Jones and his street crew for getting up extra early and making sure the debris and leaves were cleared before too much flooding happened. One update that I want to just make you aware of, before the end of the year, you will likely see a lease renewal for a firing range that we lease from Sitla for the police shooting range, where we get our certifications, and other law enforcement agencies around the valley use it as well for their certifications and training. We have a current lease with them that is expiring. This new lease will probably have some additional requirements related to environmental compliance, lead management plans, and reclamation plans. So just to give you a heads up, it was something new we didn't know was on the horizon. So there are a lot of upcoming community events over the next few weeks. I've made a list of them, including the Moab Monster Mash event, which is being thrown by the Film Commission. It's a film competition that will be screened on October 30th at Star Hall. Beak has worked really hard on it. We're excited. Of course, the annual Day of the Dead event, Trunk or Treat, as we discussed last time, is happening at Swanee Park. The Folk Fest has submitted their permit for an event, and the Turkey Trot is coming up this November. The Turkey Trot, you can register for that at our Moab Recreation website if you're interested. Another big event is elections coming up. Voting is underway. A lot of people coming and going to our recorder's office these days. The voter registration deadline has passed. It was October 22nd, but you still may register to vote at the early voting locations at Moab City Hall or on election day at City Hall, and those will be provisional ballots that will be verified later and then counted after the election. You can vote by mail, in person, or do some early voting October 27th through the 29th and November 1st at the recorder's office. And finally, a heads up, we're going about our city health insurance. We review it every year to understand the premiums that we pay and the health insurance costs. And due to increasing costs, we're probably going to switch health insurance carriers, and there will be open enrollment starting November 4th, so watch out for that as a council. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Carly. And thanks for holding down the fort. 5.2, finance update. Welcome, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So in my role as finance director for the city, one of the commitments I've made is a quarterly financial update. And as I've considered what would be of most value to the council and to the public in this quarterly update, as opposed to doing a full comprehensive review, in depth that may be overwhelming, I've decided that it would be best to select one topic per quarter, unless there's other items that are of interest to the council, which you can always send me at any time. For this first quarter of the fiscal year, the one thing that stood out to me, and I think is of most interest to the public and to you as a council, is to review the revenue, namely the sales tax revenue and how that's been trending for the fiscal year. So I wanted to do a little bit more of a deep dive into that, but before I do that, I had 4 points to make just to clarify before we dive in so that we don't have to do this midway. Our budgeted revenue values were based on fiscal year 2019 budget values, and those were derived from the prior fiscal year with a small inflationary adjustment added.
Not
So when you
2020? I
No,
can't imagine
not-
why.
Weird, right? So
Seems safe.
this information is because, like the mayor pointed out, the prior fiscal year there were a lot of one-time events, and so that's what the
We hope.
exactly. So that's what those budgeted revenue values were. There's also going to be a slight variance for those fact checkers out there. When you compare this to audited financial statements, the information that I'm presenting that's due to accruals that are done in the financial audit. I backed out those accruals for purposes of this analysis. There's also a correlation between visitation and sales tax revenue. And while we often draw that correlation, there's also many other factors. This isn't a study of tourism and visitation in the city of Moab. There's a lot of other factors with room prices and inflation, and there's a lot more that goes into it. Also, there's a 2-month lag when we talk about revenues. So a July receipt of sales tax revenues will be from May purchases. So it's for 2 months prior. So when we talk about revenue for July through October, we're talking about sales tax remittance that occurred in May through August. Okay, so now we get into the fun part. So this is more of a broad overview of what our sales tax revenue sources are, and this is just a refresher. So on the far left side, we have our full retail transactions. This is a typical transaction at a retailer, basically a non-grocery item. And as you all know, our sales tax rate is 8.85%, of which the city receives approximately 2.7%. There's multiple other things that go into the sales tax rate. And then this is kind of a less known. I think everybody understands that sales tax revenue on grocery items is less, but you may not, we haven't talked yet, at least since I've been here, about what that constitutes and who receives that money. So in the case of a grocery transaction, the state rate drops from the 4.85% to 1.75%. The county rate and the local distribution rate stay at the 0.25 and the 1% respectively. And as you all know, the local distribution tax, we don't receive 100% of that. It's distributed half based on population and half based on receipts. That serves as a disadvantage to communities such as Moab. And that's something that I wanted to bring to your attention as we enter the next legislative session. There's always discussion about changing how that local distribution revenue works. And for many communities, that wouldn't have a material impact, but that can have a huge impact for the city of Moab. The other item that a lot of people talk about when it comes to sales tax rates is transient room tax. And that is distributed to county, state, and municipal, of which the city receives 1.5%. So when there's a room tax, you combine the 8.85% with the 6.07%. And then by adding the 2.7% that the city receives for traditional sales tax and the 1.5%. There's a lot of percentages here, guys. I'm trying to not wear you out with percentages.
We're with you 100%, Ben.
Thank you. Basically, what I'm establishing here is that the city receives a significantly lower portion of the sales tax revenue than the receipts. And there's those three primary factors that contribute to that, three types of sales tax.
Real quick, back one slide.
Yeah.
Just to put a finer point on it, when we hear it talked about at the state legislature of the change of state tax, you'll hear it referred to as the 50-50. And the 50-50 is the distribution, what comes back and what stays there. And the conversation about shifting that is because there's less retail and there's more online purchasing, right? So the state is trying to compensate. They're trying to take some money, hopefully their hopes is from the education budget, from income tax, as well as changing the 50-50 distribution. And you're right, very right. That is going to be so much more painful to us because of our size and because of the makeup and our revenue streams, how we're not diversified at all in our revenue sources.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that additional clarification. I won't spend too much time on this slide. I've talked about seasonality before. This is how we project what our revenues will be. So if we budget $2.5 million in a sales tax revenue, we know how that is historically distributed, where we receive a large chunk through the early fall, and then that dips into the winter season as visitation lowers. The seasonality is very different also for transient room tax as it is for traditional sales tax. That's just a full retail transaction because the local sales, local population supports that traditional sales throughout the winter months. Okay, so now we're getting into the monthly increase over our fiscal year 2017 to 2019 average. This is where it gets really interesting. So our sales tax revenue in the month of August, and remember that's for June visitation, was 77%, was a 77% increase over the fiscal year 17 through 19 average. I think I've used the word unprecedented before. That's extremely unprecedented. And what we saw for the following 2 months is a stabilization of that. You would expect, just simply due to inflation, you would expect that to be an increase, a modest increase over time. We're seeing, I think we've called it the COVID effect of traveling and local domestic tourism. What we're seeing now is that stabilization for September and October. So we're floating more in the 30 to 40% range over the same months of the fiscal year 17 through 19. Okay, so now with that seasonality in mind, we can get a better idea of how of projecting where we will be at relative to budget. And that's the purpose of this slide, is to establish that. The 9.2 million is the total budgeted values for sales tax revenues, excluding transient room tax, because the seasonality differs from that. And so when we're projecting that revenue and estimating where we'll be at, the blue line is the seasonality of sales tax revenues as predicted by our seasonality and the budgeted amount. So based on our budget, this is where we would be at that point in each month. The green is where we have ended up, and the red line assumes that a return back to normal. So basically, if visitation now returned to 2017 through 2019, through the budgeted averages. So our current conservative budget overage on revenues is $1.3 million. And if we assume that this trend continues of 30 to 40% increase, then we would end up at 12.7 million total in sales tax revenues, which would be $3.4 million over budget. That is a very aggressive assumption, and it's not something that I would recommend we assume is going to happen for the remainder of the fiscal year. In reality, it's going to be somewhere in between there. And luckily at this point, we have a balanced budget. We don't have a reason to go back and revisit the budget. There's no need for a budget increase, but that is where we're at currently with the fiscal year. And this is the same thing these are the same numbers for transient room tax, where a conservative budget estimate would put us at $200,000 over budget, and a more aggressive approach to forecasting would put you at $490,000 over budget. So with that, the question is what's next? And the answer to that, ultimately, traditionally, we do a budget amendment 2 times per year, once in December, once in June, just to update for new realities. There aren't a significant number of material adjustments that staff will be recommending for our budget. We will be making a few minor adjustments just as needs have changed, as the environment has changed since we adopted the final budget. So that will be proposed in December. That said, we won't be making any recommendations based on the new reality of our current revenues. And the reason for that is because we really don't want to assume that these trends of increased revenues will continue. And by giving it a little more time and seeing how it cools off, then as we move into our strategic planning for fiscal year 23, we will have a much better idea of where we will end up. And then we can focus on some of these key issues. I put a quick couple bullet points up there of capital infrastructure, hotspot funding, general fund balance, some of those really heavy topics that we discussed about shortfalls as we discussed the property tax, when we discussed that in depth. So that is what's next. Again, I wanted to keep this quarterly update fairly short, so I just focused on the one topic of revenues and where we were at. And if you guys have any questions, you're always feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I can answer any questions about the financial status of the city. So thank you.
Thank you for this report, Ben.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to item 6 of our agenda, Boston. Mayor and council reports. So we can all be mindful of time here. I attended the redistricting event that I told you all about. UIRC.utah.gov is where you can go and draw your perfect view of what redistricting would look like. They are taking comments and they will be reporting back to the legislature. What they do with it is up to them, but it's probably a comment that you could also pass along to legislators as well. And I encourage us all to do that. The message that happened that night and the message that I encourage us all to continue to share is that we do not wish for our valley, to be split at either Highway 191 or at the county line. Those are the two ways in which we have been divided as a community based on our representation. And so that message, if nothing else, if you can share that and continue to share that, that's very helpful. Again, the message is that we do not wish to be split. We do not wish to split our valley either along 191 or along the Grand County, San Juan County line. I attended the League of Cities and Towns board meeting and LPC, and all I want to say about that is that policing is still a topic that's going to be addressed at the legislature again this year, but also excitingly is water use priorities coming from the governor directly. What we talked about in our water management plan or conservation plan is coming out of the state as well. So we're going to have political will to do things like gray water, mandatory gray water, and other things like that, because it's possible that it's going to happen from the state anyway. Very exciting. Yesterday there was a small business, SBA roadshow that wait, was it yesterday or today? It was actually today. I just wanted to share that SBA, a few things. They still have funding. They still have EIDL loans available. And then they also are still, between SBA and other partners in the state, including the Governor's Office of Economic Development, there is still money out there for businesses that are struggling. So Sarah Barstow, she's local, and she is now the new SBA, I think she's actually the women's business liaison, but she can direct anyone interested to where those resources are. And then finally, there's been some confusion in our community regarding when trick-or-treating might happen. And there is no authority on the subject. And the city is certainly not the decider about trick-or-treating, but the trend, the way that it's always been, is whenever Halloween falls on a Sunday, trick-or-treaters still go out on a Sunday. And I suspect that we will have trick-or-treaters Sunday night going around town. The trunk-or-treat, as you mentioned, Carly, is Saturday. It's 2 to 5, and it's at Swanee Park. It was originally conceived as an idea for the littler ones of our community. It's during the daytime. It's a very fun community event. I told my son going to both felt like double dipping. And he responded to me, "No, Mom, everybody's doing it." You can imagine the conversation after that. But all that to say, the Moab City is not an authority or a decider on when trick-or-treating occurs, but historically it's been that if it falls on a Sunday, it's happening on a Sunday, and that's what I suspect will happen this Sunday. And that is all from me. Ronnie?
Oh boy. Okay, sorry, there are a few of these, but I will try not to mention too much. I was at the Independent Redistricting Commission meeting with the mayor. I just wanted to thank her for speaking up for our community to keep it from being split, and just encourage anyone, yes, do go to that website, because the commission members were very clear that they definitely want input from local residents, and they gave us concrete examples of where they've gone in and changed their draft maps based on input they heard from people. So let's see, and just on the LPC, I thought a few other things they mentioned that were just interesting were they said to keep aware if you happen to be at a place where new districts are being drawn, and start looking for that information in November. I thought it was interesting that there was mention of the local $50 million that the state has put aside from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, through the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, that there are $50 million put aside. They got 445 applications, totaling more than $1 billion. So be glad you're not on that committee trying to decide how to split that up. And yeah, just on the water end, I thought it was exciting because it is going into trying to get us all to link integrating water use and land use planning so that whenever you're making a land use decision, you're really thinking about water. And as the Utah League of Cities and Towns tries to do with legislation, very basic to everything that it's working towards is preserving local voices and local control and making sure we don't end up with legislation that has a one-size-fits-all approach. So thank you, ULCT. Let's see, we had an EMS meeting on October 19th. Some of you will recall King Lowndes Healthcare Special Service District and the EMS Special Service District share one of the sales taxes that we have, and after much debate, the similar split we've had was agreed upon for the two entities, but there was some discussion this time about whether other health entities such as the hospital should be part of that. So my understanding moving forward is that all the entities are going to gather and just get clear as met on that before next year's discussions. There have started to be monthly multi-agency communications task force meetings, including search and rescue, EMS, Park Service, Highway Patrol, Fire, Police, Sheriff, BLM, to discuss some of those communications issues, some dispatch and other issues. So those are going on. And let's see, just as the City Council, we should be aware, we may be seeing an ask from EMS Special Service District for our next budget year. And also, as has been the case in the past, in this next legislative session, probably some attempts both to look at legislation again that would make municipalities pay in for EMS services, as well as potentially legislation that would try to make sure some TRT is designated to EMS, which it is currently not. Just busy, probably just important to know, but without taking up too much time. Our September numbers at EMS were greater than previous Septembers, and October looking to be busy too. If this gives you some idea, 5 days had more than 8 calls within 24 hours, and on October 10th, the crews ran 15 calls in 24 hours. Having hiring issues like everybody else, they could use as many as 10 more PRNs, and those, of course, are the staff that are available kind of as needed. Hiring term, we won't go into the Latin meaning of the acronym. EMS is hoping to move into the building in December, barring any more funky delays. We've also been discussing wage increases for staff and what, if anything else, we could do to increase diversity of the crew. Okay, I'm going to leave time for Karen and if Carly had anything to say, and Kaylin, but we were all in Park City October 20th through the 22nd for the Colorado Association of Ski Towns meeting, and also a meeting on the 20th, just kind of informal with the Mountain Towns 2030, but they did have Biden's climate advisor, Gina McCarthy, Zoom in. I will just let Karen and Kaylin mention what was most interesting to them, but I definitely thought there were a lot of pertinent presentations for our community, including introduction to Park City's resident and business advocate. And they basically are on staff to help residents who are dealing with frustrating situations, kind of, sometimes you walk into the city, you can't figure out how the heck anything works, and it just gets confusing from there. So that is one thing that person offers, along with helping staff generate a lot of metrics about what each department is doing and accomplishing. And part of their job is constant focus and innovation and improvement. A great presentation on sustainable tourism and destination management. A really good one on equity and inclusion, and During that, we had some discussions on how, a lot of times we're talking about AMI, average median income, but the increasing discussions that are being had about average median wage, and then also a good discussion about the visioning process that Park City went through in 2020. Finally, we had our quarterly UMTRA Tailings Project Steering Committee meeting today on October 14th. The project reached the point of having moved 75% of our tailings, so that means they reached the 12 million ton mark. We think they're about 16 million tons there. Let's see, lots of time without any injury, pretty much 2 years. And the cleanup director credits the staff of our contractor, Northwind, for being innovative. We've been getting more rail cars on the bench. And we did move 1 million tons in 12 months, and that's the most since we're moved in 2012 when there was a lot more funding. And they do think that this year we'll get as much money as we got last year, if not more, and they're hoping that that will allow them to buy some extra heavy-duty rail cars, which could allow us to move 20% more tailings per train. So instead of celebrating another 1 million tons next October, we'd be doing it sooner. Let's see, look for the latest Moab Real Estate magazine, because that'll have an article on the tailings pile. And if anybody wants to get in the weeds later, they can ask me what we discussed about fish and air quality monitoring stations. That is it. Thank you.
Question. If EMS is coming to us for money, they just created themselves as a special service district, right?
Back in 2018. Yes.
So are they taxing? Because I don't recall them on the tax roll.
So yes, this is confusing. They do share, and it was in Ben's slide, a small tax that is split currently 60-40 with the healthcare special service district, and that passed. Do you remember, Tawny? Was it like 3 years ago, maybe? Jason might remember.
So if they increase their taxing amount, is it in concert with the Canyonland Special Service District and the proportion stays the same? So every dollar that's added for the taxing, like the EMS couldn't tax and Canyonland Special Service District be like, we've got enough?
Yeah, the overall percentage would go up because it's not maxed out yet. And every year, healthcare district and EMS basically discuss the split that they want to request from. And the split request is made to the Grand County Commission.
And are they talking about, because they didn't notice that they were increasing
Yeah,
this
not
year.
this year,
So they're not looking at a tax increase?
but that might come in the future.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Ronnie. Mike?
Two things. So the city has a water conservation and drought management board. I've been participating in that for some time. It was started because the state requires a water conservation plan that comes out every 5 years. First one came out in 2016. We've recently, and you guys have reviewed the latest one for this year. And all that's great, and it leaves all us board members wondering, well, now what are we going to do? And so Eve Talman, we're a little bit at loose ends, frankly. And Eve Talman is writing a draft. I've encouraged her to keep it to one page just to make it easy for you guys to read, which will summarize for you the original topics that we studied, which was just water conservation, and the additional subjects that we've taken on that have been of a lot of interest to a lot of people, including myself, which is the quantity of culinary water available to the city. And there are scientific estimates of that, but there's enough variables in the models so that nobody really wants to trust them anymore. No, that's the wrong words. Nobody feels like trusting them right now anyway. So anyway, there's those two subjects, so look forward, not to this council, but to the next council for a recommendation from the board about what they might study next year and what you guys would like to study next year. It's entirely up to you. So there's that subject. And finally, looking ahead to my tenure ending on this council, I've, among other things, adopted joining the Moab Charter School. I don't know a thing about schools, but they seem to be happy to have me. My biggest resource is my two daughters who both teach in the Denver public schools, and they can hopefully keep me out of trouble. But I'm finding out it's pretty much the same stuff, reviews, organization is the same wherever you go. So I'm looking forward to that, and I will, my connection to the city really is useful because, for example, the UDOT's micro transit system, the pilot program that we're getting started with, they're having the charter school's having trouble keeping students in part because some of the kids can't get to school because mom and dad have taken the car somewhere else. So I've been inquiring, Carly's seen that letter, about if that might be possible. So no one knows yet, but there's that. And finally, the charter school advertises a fine musical program, and they've got some musical instruments, but they don't have a bunch of guitars, for example. So I've encouraged them to look into community contributions, possibly a rap tax, although that doesn't sound too likely. But anyway, it's kind of fun to see the synergy in between what I've learned at City and the school. That's it.
Charter school's lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Tani?
Oh, okay. I attended the Housing Authority meeting, and they are closing loans on the first 9 homes in Royal Crossing, hopefully next week. And dear Audrey Graham is just giddy with happiness. Also, the staff is working on grants to continue to fund infrastructure like retaining walls and fencing, and there are 17 of the 22 units at Wingate Village, which is the developments south of town, are leased, and families are living in them, and they hope to have the other 5 completed by the end of the month. And the museum meeting, the museum has adopted a consent agenda for their meetings, which cut down considerably on a lot of back and forth, and it gave us time to work on a program that museum staff has really worked hard to bring to us. It's called Standards of Excellence Program for history facilities, and it focuses on just growing your business. And after our first little session, we realized it was geared to much larger institutions than our wee little museum, but we are adaptable. So it focuses on mission, vision, governance, and management. It focuses also on the audience and community engagement and the care of the collections. And I do have to say that the staff at the museum has elevated the collections in our museum to 21st century standards. They've done a really, really good job. And the Healthcare Special Service District was basically a business meeting. There was a lot of money talk, and the staff is kind of happy that no state surveyors have showed up, but it's always imminent. Like everybody else, the care center is struggling to find employees. They need a full-time and a part-time nurse and 4 CNAs. So if you know anybody that is wanting to do good work, go to the care center. And also 2 board seats will be expiring in the end of this year. One of the board members has said that she will stay on, so we need another board member for the Special Service District. So if you know anybody that wants to do that, they can fill out an application on the county website. So.
Thanks, Tani. Karen?
So Ronnie went over a lot of the information that that took place at the CAST meeting, and some of the things that I think would really be wonderful for new council and mayor and our continuing council to look at is Park City has a program. It's called PC Stat, and going back to the resident and business advocate position, this is someone who works with every department to collect meaningful metrics to equip decision-making, and it includes cross-department communication and collaboration, and I think it could be really effective with our city. And it seems like it's a program, it's just a Microsoft Excel worksheet, and nothing fancy. It's just actually having someone who can put in the data, and it's across every department. So like the police department, I mean, it really shows what sort of resources and are being used in each department, so that the decision makers can make very sound decisions as to when the budget comes up and budgeting for outcomes. So I thought that was really a great program. And then budgets, Ben, it was very interesting. Park City is 100 to 200% above their trending forecast. And so with that, there's that question, is this a problem or is this an opportunity? And it can be an opportunity because there's less dependence on just having one heavy season where people are coming to visit the community. And so the travel council department, the DMO, the destination management folks are looking at how using, like, really looking at your community as a brand, and with that, it's targeting who you want and when you want folks, so you can, you know, spread out that usage, and that in itself is a very healthier diversification of your economy. So it's promoting your project in a responsible tourist-based way. So that was some of the cool things that I learned. There was a lot of conversations after the meetings. I definitely liked, you know, and hopefully we'll get to this place with our community vision that that you guys will be working on this next year, but really, again, figuring out what those pillars are to the community and budgeting to make those clear. So, and then I've been still contacting various solar lighting companies, trying to see if, and Ben, I'll get with you to see if we can maybe kind of figure out an ROI on trying to do solar for our community. And then, Mayor, I would just ask that we hold a closed session meeting. You know, we had, I'm sorry, it's, having Jane come forward is, I don't want any resident or any employee to think that we're, you know, trying to ignore what has been brought forward to us. And so I'd really like an update on where we are with our investigations with past and present employees, and also with what's happening with the police department. So if we can do that, I would appreciate it. And I wonder if it's possible to have our sustainability director work with Sarah Melankoff. I mean, for 4 years that I've been on council, she's come to every meeting, and she just wants to help. And I don't know, with with the county taking over our waste, you know, part of the program was to try to figure out the count of waste diversion, and I don't have a clue. Keelan, you might have a better idea of where we're at, because I think when we signed on with that contract, we were supposed to do audits, and I just know by passing trash cans with, you know, overflowing trash and the recycling and you know, regular trash. I don't know how effective it is, but I mean, it would be awesome, like with the gentleman that we had who came, Emily, the mayor, who you invited, is using our local resources and talent to try to do better for our community. I mean, it really feels like Sarah wants to do more, and if we can incorporate an opportunity for her to, I mean, even if we just start with special events, that she could potentially be there to educate tourists or the users of the event, so that they can have a discussion about the importance of recycling. I think that would be really helpful. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Karen. Kayla?
I attended a solid waste special service district meeting. It's kind of, it's business as usual during the merger, but it is kind of business as usual. Equipment breaking, equipment being purchased, moving into our budget season, which runs on an annual basis. To answer your question, at least in part, the district manager did do a preliminary diversion analysis. So perhaps he could come present to the city briefly and give you an update on where that's at. Mila is also working on the sustainability plan. Basically, we had a draft several years ago, and she's picked that up, and she has convened a number of focus groups to review goals and strategies. And there's a materials and building focus group, and Evan and Sarah and myself, among others, are on that. So I think that will be a good venue to sort of flesh out what these high-level goals are and have a discussion about how the district and the city can work cooperatively to really make some progress in this area.
Oh, that's great.
Let's see. The Community Renewable Energy Agency Board had a special meeting last week and to hire an attorney to provide consulting services on the negotiations on rates and so forth that this agency will be engaged in negotiations on. Mila and I were interviewed for the Voices of 100% podcast, which is a podcast talking to various community leaders around the country whose communities have committed to a 100% renewable energy goal, and just talking about the different strategies in different states. And as it turns out, like other people in other states are actually looking, some states, enviously at the situation we have in Utah, where we're working collaboratively in a framework established by our state legislature with our utility, hopefully, to reach these goals in a pretty quick manner. And other communities in other states don't necessarily have such a, what seems like at this point, a straightforward pathway. So hopefully we're able to provide some information and inspiration to the masses and in podcast world. I also attended the CAST meeting, so I will regale you with just a couple highlights. So it was interesting hearing from the Park City finance director. They had a revenue shortfall plan in place prior to the most recent recession, which I'd been aware that some communities have, because you don't know when there's going to be a recession, so it's good to be prepared. And it was interesting seeing how their actions lined up with what they had thought would happen and how far into the different levels of badness they had to go, which wasn't that far. Fortunately, because as we saw for resort communities, the recession ended relatively early, at least in terms of sales tax. Another interesting tidbit is that their out-of-jurisdiction sales were the largest tax generator for their general fund revenue. And basically what that means is that now that Utah is collecting sales tax for online sales and passing that on to the communities in which the customers are, that is exceeding, for Park City, that is exceeding like their brick and mortar and other sales, which isn't necessarily good for Main Street, but interesting from the municipal perspective about the shifting source of spending and revenue. That's enough. In the interest of conducting business, I'll call it right there.
Helen, I'm wondering if the rest of us missed the memo. Are we supposed to bring our favorite vegetable the last two meetings?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Yes.
No.
Could you forward that to us, Mayor?
Yes.
I'm empowering you to personalize your workspace. Pictures of loved ones, favorite vegetables, whatever.
I'll stick to the gavel. Okay, moving right along to approval of the minutes for October 12th, 2021 and October 12th, 2021. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the meeting, I'm trying here.
Yeah.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from October 12th for the special meeting and the regular meeting.
Thank you, Tawny. Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Mike. Any discussion?
I just had some changes, and thank you, Summer. She already dealt with them.
Thank you, Ronnie. Anything else? Call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Old business 8-1, proposed ordinance 2021-16, an ordinance amending the text of the Moab Municipal Code to revise section 17.70, accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and section 17.06.200, definitions. Corey, thank you. At our last meeting, we came together and we went through ADUs. We were left with a couple of questions, but a couple of decisions. And so Nora's not with us tonight.
No, unfortunately not.
Okay. And so did you have a presentation that you were going to?
I didn't. Nora was
Okay.
going to be zooming in, but wasn't feeling up to that, so kind of last minute jumped on. What I do have are the packet submittals that you're all have reviewed, and then with the additional changes that had come in between the time the packet was submitted with comments from the council. There are some from Mike, but we did not get those from Ronnie, so I've not seen those comments to respond to. So we can
Okay.
get to those.
Yeah. Nora sent me a document. I just opened it up in Google Docs, so I sent it back to her, but it might have been this afternoon, so she might not have seen it yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have my own version that I was editing, but I didn't realize we were to do so collaboratively. I thought that staff had previously guided us away from that to avoid the gray zone with the Open and Public Meetings Act. So I guess we can deal with all our comments as best as we can in
Right. I think that
tonight.
is the plan. Right.
So do we want to pull up and work from the existing ordinance and go through any clarifying comments or points of friction? Because I think there might be a couple places where this council doesn't agree. So
Yes.
would that be an agreed upon method of getting through this? Because as I said last meeting, come on, let's pass this. So if we can get through any of the edits that we want to make tonight, we might have a passable document. You want to go ahead and pull that ordinance up?
I will, and if you'd like, I did not prepare a presentation, but do have, through those submittal materials, an overview, if that would make sense.
Let's just pull up the ordinance and
Okay.
kick it through. I just want to point out it's 8:18, so we don't want to get too far in the weeds. We want to just get
Right.
through the,
This is one document that Nora drafted specifically for this. We talked about at the agenda setting that we would include. So we can come back to this, but just wanted to display it quickly. This was the matrix showing the regulations shared by other communities that are implementing HB 82, as well as some communities in Colorado that are dealing with similar ordinances. So we can reference back to that, but just wanted to show that briefly that Nora sent over. This is the draft document that was in the packet. We do also have a document that shows some of the clarifying questions that were submitted to staff so that we could identify those if you wish. This may be the messier document, but the one that we might be able to work best from.
how many pages is this?
It's 10 pages.
And does each page have lots of comments, or are we?
No, most pages have a few, and most of them are clarifying. Some are discussion-oriented.
So we can just move through and resolve comments, hopefully?
Yes.
Were there any overarching comments that?
Well, keeping in mind that it sounds like Kaylin and I probably have things that aren't on this
Correct.
version, so we'll go in order, I guess, and we'll bring up things if we
Well,
have
let's
them
start
on
with
that
the where.
page.
Do you also have comments?
Well, kind of, I submitted a whole bunch of written comments, much as these guys did, to Nora, and she has seen those, but I haven't heard back from her. But I had a slightly different request at your convenience, Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
So Corey, it might be worthwhile if you describe for ourselves and for the audience why we're doing this to ADUs in very simplified top-level terms. And if you'll permit me to sort of spew out what I think, there's really just three major differences, and why we're doing it and what the trades are. Okay, so if I may, the three things are we're reducing this from existing setbacks. We're reducing the setbacks. They're smaller now than they used to be, which means that if you're a neighbor on one side of someone who wants to build an ADU now, you run the risk that, that new structure may be more restrictive on your vision than you would have seen before.
Would I be able, do you want to handle those individually, each question?
Yeah, well, so.
Or you go through the three?
Yeah, so we'll
Go ahead
touch
and
on all
list the
three.
three.
So setbacks, the smaller setbacks, larger heights in some certain circumstances, 20 feet instead of 10. And finally, a requirement for fewer off-street parking spaces. Now, are there any other major differences? And the reason we're doing all this is to get the density up, because we've had a world of requests for affordable housing, and this is one way to accomplish it.
Right. With all of,
Size would be another one.
Size? Well, yeah, that's a good point. That's the fourth one, size.
and I think there are a number in the details in addition to those three maybe major ones, and then in respect to each of those three with setbacks, what we actually have within our existing ordinance is no different than what is being proposed, but what we're actually doing is allowing them to be developed in a way that is more straightforward. So in an example of an ADU in this ordinance, if it's under 20 feet, it would be able to be within what was the standard setback, which was typically in our residential zone, 7 feet and 12 feet rear. So a 7-foot side and 12-foot rear. We're now adjusting that to a 5-foot and a 5-foot. So that's getting closer to the property line. However, we also in the previous ADU ordinance allowed for ADUs to be built above accessory structures, garages, most of the time. In that situation, a property owner could build a garage 5 feet from the side and 5 feet from the rear, and then the next day after getting that CO, if it's a new construction or if it's even an existing garage, could come in and put an ADU that was 20 feet tall, 5 feet from the property and 5 feet from the property. So what we're drafting here is no different than what could happen, but what it makes it is rather than a loophole, we're being very upfront about what you can and cannot do, which clarifies language for the planning department as far as permitting and how they're able to construct those, so they're not running into issues with their plate heights for those structures where they're now building ADUs that are actually 22 feet tall. So we're having issues where we're having to make compromises where it's actually not meeting the building height because they thought they could build something. So it clarifies that, but then offers the opportunity that if they build within the required setbacks, 7 and 12, they can go to 30 feet high, which is the same as our standard underlying zoning, which speaks to the reduced regulatory barriers to allow it to be easier for folks to build ADUs. So that's one setback, or excuse me, the setbacks component. So to answer your question, I don't think that's a major change. It's more of a clarification of code where we've previously seen loopholes and we're closing that loophole. With larger heights, I think I addressed that as well, is that we are allowing larger heights, what was not previously allowed. However, that's a regulatory barrier that some folks with plate heights, especially for a structured garage, to allow not just a small car, but a truck, and then the plate height, which is the distance between your roof and then the floor above, and then being able to have a pitched roof ADU, you are surpassing the building height. So that 30 feet would allow for more opportunity for more people rather than restricting them to a very limited option of properties, the way it could work. And as far as fewer off-street parking, that is not something I'm familiar with as being proposed in this or the previous drafts. It's always been one required parking space for ADUs in our previous code, and what is being proposed now is consistent, one parking space per ADU.
But there was a size cap before?
There was for ADUs?
Yes.
There was a size cap in our existing code of 1,000 square feet. What's being proposed now is also a size cap of 1,200 square feet. There is also an additional bonus bump that if you have a property that's over 20,000 square feet, you can increase that square footage to 1,500.
Right.
And then to comment on Jason's comment, thanks for watching planning commissions, maybe where you got that. Not many people did watch that planning commission discussion, but that's where some of that commentary of unlimited size for ADUs, which got reined in because that would be, as was discussed by citizens to be heard, would get unruly pretty quick. But what
You can do a second as well if your lot is like a half acre.
Correct. So that was another condition on lots that are over 20,000 square feet. If you have a very big lot, you would open it up not only to the increased size, but also an option for a second external ADU on that lot, which within our zoning code, as far as density goes, would be more than enough that you could have subdivided and done a far more dense development. So if for whatever reason, and through the planning commission, we have folks that are familiar with residents that do have a situation where I don't want to subdivide, I just want to allow these two little cottages to be on there. It would speak to those very few situations, but it would allow that to happen. So more density without the increased subdivisions.
And the height so that you can build a unit above a garage. Also, you can put it in front of a primary structure.
Correct, as long as it meets the underlying setbacks.
You always have to have a primary structure. That's not changing.
There was, some discussion about that as well, that whether we want to permit ADUs in advance of the primary. So if you've been permitted, and we don't have to go for it, I'm seeing some shakes, but if you've been permitted for you're in the building process for a primary, you can build the ADU in advance, live in that, and do an owner builder, or have somebody else build it. But the condition is that it was going to be a primary dwelling, and that's something else we can talk about, is the difference between primary dwellings and primary structures, and the implications for that discussion as far as owner occupancy, where that goes from there. Primary structure it's the big house. An ADU is the little accessory house. A primary dwelling is in specific reference to a primary resident, the owner occupation of that primary. It's a tax code determination, and HB 82 specifically calls out that IADU, what this whole discussion is about, the required permitting of IADUs in that fashion for primary residents. So that's why this whole owner-occupied component is pretty relevant, and there's some pretty significant.
And just to clarify, because these are all kinds of words and
Yep,
acronyms,
yep.
This council, and just correct if this is inaccurate, but this council at the last meeting did say we were okay if the primary structure was not the owner of the property. That we're okay if the owner of the property is renting the primary structure and the ADU? Or there was still...
Well, that was proposed, and on the fly, I agreed with it, but in the intervening 2 weeks, I've considered it. And at least in regards to internal accessory dwelling units, I am in favor of the primary, or one unit being the owner, because I feel like two reasons. One is that dividing an existing home into a primary residence and a rental property is a pathway to ownership. And I feel like we should at least give this a try with the ownership requirement to see how many Moab residents may take advantage of it and may use this as the additional income available from a property as a pathway to get into the market where they've been, prior to this ordinance, will have been priced out. And maybe it won't bear much fruit, in which case we can reconsider, but I think it's worth a shot. The second is that, as I read the state code, it's written as though the one side would be the owner, and I asked staff about this and haven't heard back, that allows the municipality to enforce the short-term rental prohibition based on advertising, which is different from the preemption that we're all familiar with. And so it seems like that's pretty valuable. It seems like that's a chink in the short-term rental debate in the state. So I think we should, and I'd appreciate staff clarification if it's a precondition, although my first reason is enough for me to change my mind.
Well, let me ask you this, because here's what it feels like. There are a lot of comments. There's a document that maybe hasn't been fully fleshed and addressed. Ronnie's comments haven't really been fully addressed. I'm feeling some concerns about this from Mike's perspective as well. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get through this ordinance tonight in this fashion and have a joyful consensus of this ADU ordinance. I'm wondering if we should have a workshop.
Please.
And workshop through, instead of going through at this council meeting tonight, and workshop specifically the ordinance. Maybe we can have you collate, and then we can workshop and have the document finished so that we can bring it back to council meeting and formally pass it. Does that sound better than doing this
Generally
tonight?
okay, but I didn't know if it would help staff if any of us have other questions that have arisen to us in the meeting in the interim that maybe we felt like we hadn't addressed as a group yet, to throw those out now in case it gives staff any time to look into them.
Well, do we want to do that during this meeting, or can we just individually meet with staff to express things
I'm just kind
prior
of
to the
interested in
workshop?
what other questions have come up for people, but
Yep, so.
You want to do that now and not just do that at the workshop?
I wouldn't mind taking 10 minutes to hear. I mean, I just want to make sure I understand. So Kaylin, you're saying it now seems like it's advantageous not to allow a second homeowner to put in a IADU? Did I understand that right?
Yes, because
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Well, I just feel like, I mean, there is some research that we could be doing between now and then. It would just help me to know if I should be doing that as a council member or if staff can do it. But when we went to CAST, not only did some communities say that they started with commercial than residential when dealing with some of their housing stuff, but also that I realized I don't think we've resolved this question of, you know, if we do decide to do, say, 90 or 180 days on the lease, we haven't resolved this question of whether you could then move to month. So I didn't know if anyone had time to do that research, but it seems like research that still needs to be done. And I didn't know.
I think we said that, and Nora agreed that the language of our ordinance would reflect that.
I just didn't know, like at what point does this go to legal review? Is it like once we have it all cleaned up? Or?
I mean, we have our land use attorney with Snow Christensen doing it, but it is not a difficult, it would just be a minimum of whatever the months were and then month to month permitted.
Okay.
That's not a tricky.
Is that in this draft?
Yes.
It should be, yeah.
Can you just pull it up so that Ronnie can read it?
Sure.
But then otherwise, there was a document that you shared before pulling up the ordinance that was data collected of what other communities are doing. Can that
Correct.
document be shared to the council?
Yes.
Okay, so we want to share that, and can we share documents from comments from council members to council members?
Like amongst each other?
Yeah.
It would be deliberation because you're all reading each other's comments. So it would be best, I'm trying to think about the most efficient way to do it. If we could take some time tonight, that's probably the most efficient. We have documents from a few of you that we can collate. It just hasn't been done.
Okay.
And we can just have like a deadline for additional comments after this meeting.
Okay, so
ahead of the
this
workshop.
ordinance has whose comments in it?
Just to,
No, that's just
No.
staff comments, isn't it?
But it's addressing the comments that were made.
The strike through of blue were the previous amendments from the first draft that you're seeing. These red comments that you're seeing on the side are those that were asked by council members. And I think these reflect Mike's questions. I don't think that we got any in here from Kayla,
I'm
Karen,
not
or
seeing
Ronnie.
Ronnie's on there.
Okay.
Correct. And
Yeah.
my understanding was Ronnie said that she was going to reach out to Nora specifically because there were so many and have that conversation, and did not send it through a document like this that I got until it was today, I think, Ronnie, that sent over. I just didn't have access to it through the
Yeah,
drive.
no, sorry, I thought Nora was doing it, so you're the one person I
right,
didn't include.
right,
Everybody
right.
else here was included, but
Right.
yes. Yeah.
Corey, can I just ask a very dumb question? The internal ADUs, were they just not allowed before? I mean, why is that?
They were permitted. We had a consistent standard between all ADUs. So we only declared ADUs, whether it was internal or external. What the major difference now, because of HB 82, and there can be some, I think, more creative strategies to take advantage of HB 82, but then also protect our building department with increased requirements that wouldn't be a part of these HB 82 IADUs. We could have a separate type, and we can talk about that during the workshop. But it's the reduced requirements within those. So what it would make sense to do at this point, which is what we've done, is define ADUs into two sections, the external and internal. And that internal that we have right now is just the HB 82, which means very reduced restrictions, suppression or separation requirements. Makes it very easy for folks to install one, but in the staff's perspective, puts a lot of challenges in front of our building department, because now you're have less requirements for you can have shared air, shared utilities with limited access between the units. A number of things that would make it, in some staff's opinion, unsafe to a certain degree. So we want to make sure that we have a safe product that's going out, but also reduced regulatory barriers to allow more folks to build these ADUs or come into compliance if there are situations where we have illegal duplexes or conversions that they didn't know about, or what other situations we just get everybody permitted in a way that's safe and legal.
Gotcha. And then, so a question that came up, I mean, after doing all of this reading, it made me think, like, so we are trying to focus, trying to incentivize with reduced setbacks to have workforce housing. But like this last weekend, I had 13 family members at my house. Like, can I have an ADU and not rent it out and have it only used as guest quarters? That has not changed, because that was allowed before, and that has.
It would, right. The reason for the dwelling unit is the capacity of that unit, what you might call a detached guest cabin, or what we often see coming through the department is art studios or yoga studios, which have all the makings of an ADU except a kitchen element, which unfortunately is really easy to implement after the fact. So we may have a number of those and we're working with those folks that have either converted or the prior owner had converted illegally, and we're trying to get them up to speed. So for you to have a guest cabin is very easy, just as an accessory structure. Wouldn't be a dwelling unit, but if you wanted to have a kitchen in it, would be permitted under our current code as an external dwelling unit. We're just making it bigger, easier, and
But aren't we trying
more
to add
compatible.
some restrictions to have it for workforce or family members or retirees? I mean.
Yeah, and that was part of the language in here. What we've run into with that is the limiting language. What you would often see is most people are going to want to take advantage of that space. So if you had an ADU but never rented it out because you just wanted to have it for friends that came to stay, that's within your property rights as it is right now. But most folks are going to try to rent it out on some sort of basis, whether it's 3-month or longer intervals.
And so if you're going to rent it out, there are more requirements associated with it. Yes. And that's what, yes.
Well, and what during some discussions that we've had is that we have limited ability to define who can stay there. And I think what we were moving away from was trying to define workforce housing or retirees or family members by the simple, that's somewhat of a redundancy. If we have a no nightly rental requirement, which is currently in our code and is also proposed here, you cannot, short-term rental, which is 30 days or less, and you are renting it, it's very likely that if it's not nightly rental and it's being rented, it's going to be somebody that's living here, because that's how rentals typically work. And we also have conditions that you're not able to individually own that unit. So the likelihood of it being used as a second home or a vacation home is limited
Right.
as well. So that was additional built-in redundancy, but it also can create exclusions because now you're setting limitations on who can stay there. So removing that eliminates that issue, and it just reduces the redundancy in there, but double redundancy in some effects can be helpful. Not in this one, we don't believe.
So we need to take this to a workshop. Does anybody have any further, go ahead, Ronnie.
I'd just like to make sure when we go into the workshop, we can discuss a few other things. I know Mike raised the issue of defining retiree or family. So we do that. I think the concern for some people is we all love retirees, but I think the reason some people in the community have focused on people who retired here is that, what person retiring wouldn't love to come live in Moab, but are we trying to prioritize the people who've been in this community, who want to stay in this community? It's just something for all of us to think about, to what extent we want to consider that. But then also, we haven't touched it all. We talked a little bit last time about how some people were hoping the Housing Authority could take this on, but they have no, we found it since, they have no capacity. So, I do think part of that conversation needs to be, how much time is this going to take a staff person? And are we looking at having to add staff or a partial staff person to do the deed restriction practical work, but then also the enforcement end? And then since Kaylin did bring up enforcing short-term rentals, it'd be great when we had the workshop if we could talk about, especially if we choose the model he's talking about, what tools we do and don't have, just so we all understand going in what we can and can't do.
Well, I think Kaylin was saying we can use websites to enforce for this. We can't use it to enforce for overnight accommodations that are not in an ADU.
At one time, the city subscribed to STR Helper
Yeah.
or maybe, I don't know, I was cooperative with the county to at least monitor the situation. And so that could then be potentially used as an enforcement tool for IADUs.
But thanks, Ronnie. Other questions?
No, is that your understanding for the EADUs too, Kaylin? The external ones?
I think it was just IADUs in the state code.
Correct.
It was to make people comfortable with the whole concept, because
Yeah, we were
communities like
actually,
us-
I was on those
yeah, we were
calls
on that call with
pushing
the
hard
representative.
for that
Okay.
ability. Andy Bierman and I were kind of on those calls with Ward, the sponsor.
Okay, but so it doesn't include EADUs, so that's just probably part of our conversation then about.
I think it's all ADUs,
Okay.
I or
Okay,
E.
okay,
Well, ADU.
thanks, okay.
Just to respond very quickly, that was one of the major discussion points Nora wanted to bring up, was how to move forward with licensing enforcement or types of registration, making that feasible if HASU is unable to accommodate with their current staffing. This is the generation of this document, which will be shared with you so you can review it later, but showing which locations, communities are owner occupied, but also what types of licensing or restrictions they use, whether it be registration, licensing, conditional permits, things like that. So within HB 82, we are limited in what we can regulate or require. However, it does open up opportunities for us to how we're going to navigate that without having a third-party follow-up code enforcement with our ability. So within staffing level, something like a registration or some sort of permitting would be helpful, because then we have a tracked paper account here in the planning office. But that would be one discussion item to think about, that when we do come to the workshop, you have that already in mind of what you think you might want to implement.
So I had a discussion with Mona about this, and she said it would be effective for her and that department to actually look at the good landlord program again at Salt Lake. We had that discussion when we were first on with David Everett, and so she said that would be worth having that conversation, but it would take. She would, like if we're looking at staffing, and it could be used as potentially a half-staff in the police department, but that having, that person there to help with with our landlord program might be the best way to go.
Okay.
Can
I just, well, hold on, because the scheduling of this, it feels like we need to look at November 9th as the workshop before a regular meeting. And so, does anyone have a problem with doing that during the day?
I'm just waiting on a meeting with potentially a staffer for the Department of Energy, but I would say just go for it, and I'll try and nudge them away from this meeting.
And so we could do like a 1 to 3, because we want at least a couple of weeks based on all of the comments before we have our workshop. And then we have our workshop, we'll stop it at 2 hours. If there's nothing to pass, then we'll table it until our December meeting. And that should be fine. And those that have been elected can certainly attend and get caught up to speed anyway.
I guess I just have a question. Is there any advantage to trying to do the workshop before the next packet goes out so that, if we're coming out with a new, something we might be voted on, so it could be in the packet for that November 9th meeting, or?
I think what we would put in the packet is all of the documents of consideration, which we would notice anyway. So I don't know that that matters to me.
So Mayor, may I have a suggestion for Corey and for Nora? I'd be happy to come into the office if it's useful, but they have Nora make another pass on the draft ordinance, incorporating everybody's comments who's written in as best she can. Take the places where there's clearly agreement on, independent agreement, I might add, from different people about changes we may want to make to it. There's a number of inconsistencies in the places where the whereases come in and so forth. Clean those up. I also requested further definition about what's a family, for example, and so on. Another piece of information that anybody who wants to build an ADU is going to want to know is what are the infrastructure requirements? Under what circumstances will a new water tap, a new sewer tap be required? And under what circumstances, whether it's occupied or not, as Ronnie brought up for a while, if it's not property tax considerations, for example. I mean, all these things are going to factor into an owner's decision to build an ADU, and while they're not really part of the performance specs that we're discussing here now, there's still things that need to be written down in user-friendly format somewhere. So, if we could kind of get all that together, then the meeting itself would go a lot faster.
Certainly. I think really as complex.
So the meter requirements in the ordinance is what you're asking for that final one?
Well, as close as you can get. I'm sure we're going to argue about it. We may have to make another pass about it, but we'd get closer if she could incorporate all as best she can. And I'd be happy to sit down with her just in case she says, well, what do you mean here, Mike? Or what do you think Ronnie meant? Well, I think she meant that. So on.
Going through these, as many and as diverse as they actually are fairly all consolidated, where it is almost a toggle button between we think this thing on this or this on another. So I know it is
That'll be helpful.
I know
for
it's
the
quite
workshop.
complex, but it really, we could knock it out.
But I just want to highlight what he's saying about being specific about if you add an ADU, do you have to have a separate sewer?
We can do a matrix for that. It wouldn't necessarily be something that would be within the ordinance language, but a matrix of if you're doing an IADU, here's what you might need to do. Here's an EADU, what you might need to do. And of course, site conditions play into that factor, what existing conditions of the primary dwelling. So it can't ever be.
We could codify the matrix and.
No, it would be site by site.
It would be site by site.
It would depend on their existing capacity.
In
And those things.
generality, it's within ADUs, you are paying an impact fee, but you're not doing additional connections. You're not, especially with HB 82, not doing any really increased separation suppressions. With duplexes in the building code, there are single dwelling units and 2 units, whereas zoning, there's all these different definitions. That's where it's important, I think, to understand where the differences lie. But
I think
between
it's more
a
if
duplex
it's
and
an
ADU,
external
it's the
ADU.
same thing.
It's more like if it's an external ADU, are you required to do a second connection?
No, for sewer, water,
But
you
it's
are
not in code. So what Mike is saying is maybe we should consider codifying. And I'm hearing it's complicated. but that there could be a matrix.
Yeah.
And that could be a chart that's in our code.
I think we do have guidance about when one is required and not. It's not so simple as not an EDU and an external or internal.
Where, if I might, where most of that comes from is from the building code, and then in some cases, fire code. And repeating some of those, especially with something that is so fluid as the land use code, you get redundancies that, especially when the IBC is changed, or our residential building code is changed, then you're having lots of conflicts between those. So working with Barry and working with our building department, we work in tandem that a matrix, when somebody comes in, we have a packet saying, here's your map, you can choose your own adventure. But putting that in the codified version, I think might get really sticky, especially.
Does that make sense, Mike?
But we
Okay.
can
And then we
generate
can-
that for the
and we
discussion,
can
for sure.
Keep talking about that at the workshop, too.
And Corey, I just let you know, Carly had the version up with my comments, so she just shot you access, so
Great.
you have it now.
Thank you.
Okay, any final comments? Is there a motion? To do something that would then prohibit us from speaking further on the
I
issue?
can move to table until we have our workshop.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, 8.2, discussion and direction on sewer rates. Ben?
Yeah, so originally this agenda item was to get further direction and possibly narrow down between the options that were presented in the last council meeting. We will have Keith Larson and Aaron Montgomery joining us again for any questions that we may have for them. We have a few new slides to present and just a few very simple concepts. And from that point, it's really your decision on how much discussion you'd like to have on this topic tonight.
Because really, at this point, discussion is really limited because we've got a public hearing that's happening, and we've already submitted that we've got 3 proposals for the sewer. So
Precisely. So that was
we're
the
getting
point that-
additional information, but there's really not direction at this point. We're full steam ahead to a public hearing. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So at our last meeting, Chuck mentioned that we were 70 to 75% below the septage hauling rates, and then we had a letter from OB, and it was at 23? Okay, I'm just curious where we're.
Yeah, and I was looking through our July to September revenues, and I might be looking at the wrong line, but under sewage septage processing fees, it actually seems like we're at 76% for the entire budgeted year. I'll have Ben double check that, but that threw me too.
And Obi, if you want to come up and join, you're welcome to. I looked at that detail. And it looks like previously,
Mark, do you want to also join, just to field
one of the
any
primary
questions from
accounts was Canyon Lands was in question, where that septage was being transferred. And it looks like that is now coming to the MRF, different industry altogether.
We're talking about the Park Service?
Yes.
Yeah, the Park Service comes to the plant, they haul their own septage. The rest contract out the pit toilets.
So we had the small question at our last council meeting because we were saying, is there any other place to get money? And we said, well, if they're not dumping here, is it advantageous to open back up to dumping here? And what is the cost difference? So can you speak to that specifically?
So there's one specific.
And can you bring the mic closer? Thank you.
There's one specific company that is not hauling here anymore, Waste Logistics. They're out of Price. It's cheaper for them to bring it back to Price. They have a pre-treatment facility there, and that seems to be cheaper for them. It seems like the cost of septic is kind of right where it should be.
Okay, so.
And it's really not, I mean, they're big percentages that we're down, but money-wise, for what we need, it's really not that much money.
So your recommendation is to not drop sewer rates to accommodate to have this hauler stay and dump here?
Definitely not. The
Okay.
septage is really not easily processed.
Oh, can I
So,
try
I
to
mean,
be an adult?
if, I think we're at the right point where if we're losing a little bit, but we're still making more money because it costs more, then we're right at the right balance.
Thank you for clarifying that. That was a question at last council meeting. Go ahead, Ben.
For me to share my screen with the Zoom, can I go ahead and, how does that work with the Zoom participants?
Oh, because it's like meta happening.
It's a little.
It's going like boom, boom. It's doing its meta thing. Because it sees us seeing us.
Yes, sorry about that. Let me fix this. This should fix it.
So I can share now.
You can share now, and basically what I'll do is what goes out to YouTube will be what you're sharing.
Okay, I can stay on my slides just briefly, and then we can go back to Keith and Aaron, because we like seeing their faces.
Aaron looks like Max Hedren. And that is a age-defining statement. He's just not in the right glasses.
Okay,
Oh my gosh.
there we
So
go.
funny.
Okay, so this is just the intro page. This is just really briefly to show option A, B, and C side by side in the percentage variance between the three options. Blue being option A, this is where we are able to accomplish all the capital projects needed. Option B, and we can address the capital projects a little bit later too. And option C is basically just we're able to make our debt service payments and replace the absolute critical infrastructure needs. So the one thing that I was looking at and would be questioning if I was a resident is, do these rates transition us to a pay-as-you-go approach to financing infrastructure replacement? And it does not do that. So this is not providing sufficient cash to pay for the infrastructure needs. We're still bonding with each option. Very different levels of bonds, and the construction, the order in which we do the construction projects changes with each option. But I think that's important to note. This is not a cash flush option.
This is the cash, so we have the collateral to bond.
Exactly.
That's helpful.
Yep.
Thank you.
So option B defers the South Trunk Line project. Option C stabilizes, that sentence doesn't make sense, meets critical needs and avoids default. Another thing that was brought to my attention by Carly is similar to water rates, the Department of Environmental Quality establishes affordable sewer rates. I'm very familiar with affordable water rates. Affordable sewer rates are defined as 1.4% of that modified adjusted gross income value. They publicize that number. Moab's Magi is 38,000, compared with this statewide is 47,000. And this is the number that they use to establish community hardship funding. It also can be used as a baseline to say where is a city at relative to affordability. And as you can see with option A, B, and C, and this is in the coming year, if option A is presented for 2022, the average the average sewer bill would be $32.86 on option C, up to $36.52 with option A, and the DEQ's affordability calculation puts it at $44.33 per month. So we still fall well under
And that is the
affordability
Moab
threshold.
adjusted number. So if the DEQ is saying to us, hey, based on what your people make, we would expect you to have this as your rate. And so all of our scenarios are still below.
Correct. They're all below that affordability threshold.
It also means we can't apply for hardship grants because we're below it, right? We have to meet it. So right now, with it low, there's a benefit, but it also means that we're missing out on some hardship financing that would be available otherwise. Just something to keep in mind, not for this discussion, but we're well below a hardship consideration.
And we
statewide.
were at the same place when we were talking about water. DEQ came to us and said the same thing. Your water rates are just one, you're the lowest of the state except for Nibley. Nibley's lower. Otherwise, our water rates have been the lowest in the state until we took action and raised rates.
The blue column again is Moab.
That it is how the DEQ defines that affordability, is 4433.
For
Moab
Moab.
as opposed to the state at large.
No, for Moab specifically.
Okay, that's
Well,
what.
the state's 47 and Moab is 38. And so their rate calculation is 4433 for Moab.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
So it's the same.
Carly, what is community hardship funding? Like, what would qualify for that?
The hardship funding, so a lot of grants that are administered by DEQ and the Water Quality Board, such as the one that we got for the sewer treatment plant.
Okay.
They have many like funds that you can get out of, and we got out of, it was the Community Resource Fund, what was it, one of them. They have another pot of funding called the Hardship Grant Funding that we are not eligible for because our rates are so low.
So would it be to, I don't know, put solar on our sewer plant?
It
I
would be
mean,
for infrastructure and for those
Okay.
kinds of grants. So yeah, all of that, it's one pot of funding.
Yep.
Keep in mind, it's not all of them, but it's just one that we just can't apply for because of it.
And it's generally not considered good practice to base your rate around that number. It's just a baseline measurement. You wouldn't want to price your rate above that simply to apply for hardship funding. That would be a
Right.
bad practice. The process that we're going through now with the rate study is the appropriate way to set your rate.
Can I ask when we looked at this, when this was done with Zions Bank at the time, I mean, it was, again, like 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, was it, how much have we spent to do this study? To redo this study?
Did we redo it, though, because we changed policy and we removed overnight accommodations? And so our revenue stream totally changed. And is that why we're here today?
That's correct, yeah,
Does that
change
make
in
sense?
environment.
But, so, I'm just curious, because I think at the time, because we were like, well, we need to redo this, because we know there was a shortfall, and it felt like we knew that even before the moratorium, but is that not, you guys wouldn't remember, you weren't here. But I'm just curious.
We were close, yeah, and they were saying, like, you need to do something. And so we came up with a very conservative sewer rate structure, but what we've done is gotten rid of the mechanism to pay. So there's the debt service, and then there's also the operation, right? And so what we did was make difficult the payback of the debt service with the removal of overnight accommodations. And we did know, well, how many could really actually be built. Maybe we overestimated the amount of overnight accommodations that could be actualized. But at the same time, that's why we're here now. I think that's what I understand, because we don't have not even like a handful of hotels to pay for that debt service.
There was hesitation years ago to redo this assessment. I'm just curious how much this ended up costing to do.
It's under the purchasing threshold, without looking at the contract. If memory serves correctly, it was about 15.
Oh, okay, because I mean, there was discussions like the first one cost like 80 or something, so we didn't even.
Yeah, this is just a refresh
gotcha,
of the
gotcha.
original.
Okay, I
Yep.
was just curious.
I was just saying, good question.
Yeah. Moving on, this is just a repeat of this slide, just showing the capital infrastructures projects that are deferred with the various rates. And here we have, this is something that Keith put together for us based on a question that was posed in the last meeting. This is where do we compare? And I'm gonna show this briefly, and then we'll let Keith hop back on over
Look
Zoom.
at Nibley. Speaking of Nibley.
Cheap water,
So
expensive
Take it
sewer.
from the
cheap
tip
water,
top.
expensive sewer.
New plant.
So this is quite a few communities, a sampling. This is where we're at currently. This is our existing rates. That's why option A, B, and C are all the same. But we are really right in the middle. And the next slide is probably the more pertinent slide, where we have option A, B, and C. The interesting thing here is showing that option A, which is in blue, is really not that different relative to, it doesn't move us, significantly through the range of affordability. relative to other communities. So the black is option C, orange is option B. It's kind of hard to draw the line, but you end up right at about 2/3 with option A, a little over 50% with both option B and C.
But I heard Obie also under his breath say new plant. And so that is a further variable that defines where we
Yeah,
fall on the
a lot of those lower ones are on a lagoon. It's
Yeah.
a lot cheaper way to process
Right.
sewage.
And we're not doing that, are we?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Unless we don't pass sewer rates. Option D. Option L. Lagoon.
And if Keith, if you had any, we have you guys back on Zoom, so if you guys
Not
have,
good.
if you have any input back on that water rate comparison, if you want to provide some background, that may be helpful.
No, I think you guys got it covered. We just looked across the state for a whole range of different size communities and tried to give you a broad sampling. So that's what it is.
Thank you both for joining us tonight. Other comments from y'all, from Aaron?
Nothing from me. I'm just happy to be here. And thanks for the compliment earlier.
That makes us happy, Aaron. You can't tell us how many people get on and tell us they really want to come down to Moab, and finally we get someone who just is happy to be on a Zoom in Moab. That's exciting.
I did want to come down to Moab. Who doesn't want to go to Moab?
Oh, Zion's Bank.
Mayor, what is the time for some other questions?
Now is the time.
Okay. This may be a daft one, but I figure why not ask? So I have a question. So, we went and made our plan in 2018, and then unforeseen things, including overnight accommodations, and as we discussed, inflation and maybe a little less growth than anticipated. So, of course, one doesn't have a magical wand, but if you're trying to address everything possible so you're less likely to have as many surprises, some of my questions include, as we move into trying to conserve water, and I don't think everybody's going to go out and get maybe the lowest flow toilet ever now, but I mean, is there any concern with our water conservation efforts that somehow flows would go down and that would affect revenues or something on the flow side? I don't know enough about these things, so you can laugh, Obie, but.
Yeah, that's absolutely, I mean, they've shown, so revenue is tied to flow. So if there's less flow, there's less revenue.
Okay.
I think that's.
Okay, that was one thing I was wondering about. I don't know. Did you have something to say, Carly?
I'd say that our efforts for conservation are mostly geared toward outdoor water use, which is not tied to the sewer system. So those flows are lost anyway, not necessarily something we're worried about.
Brings me to my second point, because this sewer rate is our favorite issue that has also been dealing with, questions about rates or rate adjustments for churches and schools. And in that case, because we don't have secondary meters or whatever the right terminology is, we have kind of been working in some of their outdoor water into this. So I just wasn't sure. I take it somewhere through the public hearing that is going to be reassessed, or are they going to stay being designated as residents, or is there going to be an institutional rate now? I guess I was just curious. That was an issue last time, and we knew this might change again, but I just figure if some of them are listening, it might be nice to anticipate what might happen there. I guess I don't really know.
So your question is changing the rate structure that we just changed
Yeah.
on the table, or are we just talking about rates?
Yeah, because I know there was.
The three options, Ben.
Yeah.
Do we have changing the churches
So
back to where they were?
The change to the institution, I believe this was before my time, but this changed it from a monthly volume rate to the winter usage rate, similar to residential use.
Winter
So
average.
Yes, similar to how residents are measured. This does not propose a change to that structure.
Okay, I think that's probably helpful. And then what should people expect, if we decide to go to public hearing, what's going to public hearing? Would it be all three options and then people could weigh in on those, or would we be bringing deciding tonight we're going to bring one of the three to public hearing?
The draft ordinance proposal will present the three options
Okay.
as presented.
Because
Okay.
we had to post for public hearing
Yeah.
before tonight, that's why there are three options for consideration.
Okay, that's very helpful.
That way there wasn't one and then, yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't guess which one you might want in the
Okay.
future, so we just included all three for comment.
Okay, and I'm just going to apologize for being a little slow on this too, but I still get a little bit confused. We got our capital improvements project list, but we also talk about how many feet we'd ideally be replacing versus what we're actually replacing. And I guess I would just like to know, sometimes I look at the capital improvements list and I'm not clear if that's taking into account how many feet we really should be replacing, or if it's taking into account any unknowns, because we know we can have catastrophic failure at any time, and we know every month, our pipes are just getting older. So I'm just trying to digest, if we go to this rate structure, I understand we can't bond for what we would ideally need, but if we have a catastrophic failure of a big section tomorrow, where does that leave us?
Up that famous creek without a paddle.
Yeah, or is any of that built in? I mean, the capital
Have to
improvement project.
readjust our project list if there's something, I mean.
Yeah,
So like I said in the email, B and C, there is money, like some money that can be used for like incidental line improvements. But as far as like keeping up with like, if you're talking like systematic replacement, no, this plan doesn't, we're still very much in triage. Like we're trying to stabilize this system in this 10 years. In the next 10 years, hopefully we can get ahead of it and start doing, wholesale replacement projects and lining and that sort of thing.
Okay, so, and let's make sure we're clarifying between the wastewater reclamation facility and our infrastructure that
Yeah.
is, let's call it distribution.
Yeah.
So the plant is good.
The plan is
Done.
good. So the thing about the plan is in 20 years, so in the next 10 year, the next time, hopefully this comes up, we're going to be talking about expanding the plant. So there's very expensive stuff in the next iteration of this.
So like,
But yes, the
farther.
plant, in this 10 years, the plant is fine. But our
So
collection
we're-
system is not fine.
So we're focusing these numbers on, so you're asking like, are these triage numbers or are these preventative numbers? And what I'm hearing from you, Obi, is that the money that is being proposed as our sewer rate will fix the triage moments in our system, but not quite hit the preventative?
Yes, I mean, it won't do like replacement projects, like life cycle replacement projects. We're not getting to that point yet. Whereas, in 10 years from now, we really probably will be talking about life cycle, like all of our clay, 10% of our system is clay. It'll be 100 years old in 10 years.
Oh.
We'll need to replace that. 10% of the system. This capital improvement project list doesn't really touch that. We're trying to get the really high, expensive stuff done now in this 10 years.
And I think I would just add that option A gets us a lot further down that line than option C. Option C is truly triage, just keeping the wheels from falling off. Whereas if we're at the other extreme, option A, we are going the right direction. And by the end of 10 years, we'll have a pretty good plan in place. Would you agree with that, Obi?
I would. I wouldn't even call option C triage. I don't know what you call that.
an insult to pipes
Call
everywhere.
it something. Call it something. Option C, in your opinion, would be not enough to solve for the.
Fiscal mismanagement?
So just devil's advocate question, is there a reason that we don't look at something more aggressive just because, this is already going to be either A or B are going to be a big hit, so we can't even look beyond triage with, nicer bandages because it would just be too outrageous? Is that what we're thinking?
I think that was the thought, yeah.
I think it was to bring something that could actually be palatable, because these are big increases. If you wanted to see something even larger, and you thought you might realistically pass it, we might be able to, I don't know.
Okay,
Is
no,
that something
thanks.
you
It just
want
helps
to
me.
do?
It just helps me with context. So,
Yeah.
should I understand it in the sense of okay, well, I have a list of ideally what option A would accomplish, but if tomorrow, something implodes on another street, bye-bye, list on option A, we're gonna, take those funds and focus on our sinkhole or whatever.
Yeah, we would just
Okay.
reshuffle the project
Yeah.
priority list. That's what would
Okay,
happen.
thanks, that's what I needed to know. Okay.
And then I was also wondering, so our projections for how many hookups we thought we were gonna have that we didn't, and if the 300, homes come up at Arroyo Crossing and Lions Back, and I mean, is it gonna help?
Well, tease them apart because here's what's helpful. Arroyo Crossings County, that is a flat fee. Lions Park is city, that is the fee that we're talking about. What we're talking about adjusting does not affect Arroyo Crossing and what they pay. That's contract through GWISA, right? So that is different.
But wasn't the discussion that San Juan County didn't grow at the rate that they thought with population? And so we are also having this discussion? Because
we're not processing San Juan County stuff.
Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
And if you had that growth, you would get that additional impact fee revenue, so that would help. That is true. I think the mayor is referring to the fact that they won't be paying these sewer charges, but we should keep separate impact fees and sewer charges.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah. And if we want to talk about GWISA fee, it's a different conversation than this, right? Meaning the rate that non-city residents.
Yeah, that's correct. That fee is governed by your agreement with GWISA, which is tied to your own rates. So depending on the decision that you make relative to your own rates will also affect what GWISA ultimately is charged through your agreement. That's kind of the second step, though. Once we know what the rates are, we can finalize how that will affect GWISA as well.
That would inform the rate change with GWISA.
Correct.
Other questions before our public hearing?
So if I'm understanding correctly, at the public hearing, we set a maximum rate that adjustment that we might consider. And we can go below that, but not above that. Is that correct?
So on the agenda for November 9th will be, you will have an ordinance presented with 3 options that could be adopted. So in that meeting, you could adopt the final sewer rate.
But could it be higher than the proposed highest rate?
So that would be, no, because what's will be presented in that meeting will be option A, B, and C. And if you chose, you could provide direction to staff to present an option D, in which case that could be
have a public hearing.
It could be a blending of option A, B, and C. It could be higher. The ball's in your court at that point.
But we would follow with an additional public hearing and then take action.
Correct.
If we had option D or option L.
Or if by some strange event, this council at this meeting directed you to consider an option D that was a higher rate at this time, then it would be subject to public comment at that public hearing, and we could pass that then. But we'd have to, if that's what we were interested in, we'd have to get it together tonight.
Well, no, because we've already noticed the public hearing, so we've already passed, right? Summer, we've already passed the ability to change.
The notice for the public hearing has gone out, but the documents have not been uploaded yet because the notice doesn't come out in the paper until Wednesday afternoon. So if some changes were made tonight, we could post that document as affiliated with that public hearing,
So the answer is yes. So how hungry is your appetite to put a higher sewer rate? If you want to direct staff, raise your hand to put a high rate.
Is it possible to look at the one slide that we looked at 2 weeks ago that showed the rate, the first year, second year?
Yeah.
And while he's pulling the slide up,
I'm ready.
council, like, do you want to consider, I mean, because it could always be a hard no, but like this, if it sounds like we could, because the documents haven't been published yet, is that something you'd want to do, even if you might not vote for it, just to put it out there?
No, I don't want to do it just to put it out there. That's a waste of staff time.
Okay.
I'm happy with option A. Option C is ridiculous. That's a waste of our time that we've sat here and discussed if we pick that. Initially, I would have liked to have seen option A be a little bit higher, but I'm fine with it the way it is. B doesn't buy us very much. So that's where I stand, and I don't know that I will feel much different in 2 weeks.
But option A could be option D, and D would be higher than A. So that's what the question is, like, would we want to even huck out a bigger number that would give us more capacity to actually repair the failing infrastructure of our city?
Well, I think for the next
In a preventative way.
foreseeable years, whether it's this council or a new council or a council beyond, when all of us are here, they're going to have to come back to this periodically. And it seems like it's been about every 3 or 4 years. So I think that's a pretty big chunk to ask our residents to increase.
Beyond A?
Yeah, I do.
Because just looking at the comparison between, just looking at 2025, the comparison between, the delta between A and C is what in dollars?
$15.
At 2025?
Yeah. What is that, 15?
Ben, didn't you have another chart that actually had numbers?
A dollar number, the spread, right? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah,
here?
it was, I think it is more similar to that one.
The bar,
Yes.
the spreadsheet? I think it was that one.
So this is the sheet that, there's one of these charts for each option A, B, and C.
Oh, yeah, let's go to A. Has the largest spread.
So this is where you see 2160 is the current base rate for residential with a 25% increase in year one. And then followed by 10, 10, 10, 8, 5% increases. Oh, this is tiny, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well,
That's great.
There, that's better.
So we go up 25% in the next year at rate A.
Correct.
Yep. Then, yeah.
So it would be, option D would be higher than 25%.
Or it might ramp up in subsequent years relative to what's proposed, but not in 22.
Okay.
I mainly just wanted to get clarity because the idea had kind of been floated. I wanted to know procedurally that it seems like it would be silly to have a second public hearing because we couldn't be clear on what we wanted. But it doesn't seem like anyone's jumping at the opportunity to propose a higher rate.
Jump now, anyone for
Well,
D.
That's okay, but I am wondering, like, Obi and Ben, is it possible, just out of curiosity, down the line here, to throw us a number? I'm just curious what it would cost a city, you know, if you were trying to replace, say, as many feet as you ideally would be replacing every year, what that would cost. Yeah, it doesn't need to be now.
You know,
but-
it's interesting. Here's why
Yeah.
this conversation's complicated. Because I feel like for the past 20 years, the reason why we're stuck in infrastructure woes across the country is because we're hoping technology is going to advance to a place where it's like, oh, like those guys in Price with their van and what's it called, like Poop Scoop or something? It's an awful name, but they're going in and they're casing lines. And they've got a new casing technology, so it's cheaper, faster, and more readily available, and a lot less messy, right? So I think
we want to do that here, just to be clear.
Is it a
to
lot more
line-
expensive to do that? I mean, because you're not digging up roads.
Lining's much cheaper.
much cheaper.
If the
However-
underlying pipe is still good, right? Like, some areas it's not, like it's not very good. But yeah, there are a lot of lines in town that are a candidate for lining. It's just this, and I think we have some small lining projects across Main Street and some other places where it really needs it.
But we're stuck with still technology. So the answer to Ronnie, your question is like, well, what are we looking for in terms of dollars? And then it's like, well, everything depends on what technology we see in the next 5 years as well. One thing is certain, we're always going to need to move waste underground to a facility that's going to deal with it. Like, that's not going to go away. But the pipe infrastructure could get more technologically advanced. And it has. So it's hard to gauge improvement project costs. On the flip side, everything's gotten to be so expensive that we might see a 400% increase in dealing with these projects as well, which then really we're dealing with a whole bunch of problems, right?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in 10 years, but I mean, do the best you can.
We could go back to everyone gets a septic tank and pays for their hauling to the wastewater reclamation facility. And we could eliminate distribution.
Or we could move to a living building challenge standard, universal living building challenge standard,
Yeah,
encompassing toilets and gray water.
well, that is eliminating distribution,
But it's late.
but.
So it sounds to me like the temperature in the room is that option A is the most desired option. Presenting 3 options for public hearing is not ideal. That's not the ideal situation, just for clarity for the public. So if it's the council's desire, it sounds like we still can publish with one of the 3 options.
We could just publish with A. What does the council think about that?
For B.
Fine with you?
No.
I think Mike said he's for B.
Oh, you're for B. Okay.
I'm for A.
I'm free.
So we're definitely publishing A, we're definitely publishing B. Do we want to also publish C?
No.
We do not want to publish C.
I don't think so because it,
Poor
A or
C.
B?
It has no fans. Yeah.
And we're done.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think we might be done with this conversation because at this point, we're going to hear from the public and then we're going to deliberate and decide. And thank you, Obie and Mark, for being available to, and our friends Keith and Max for being available to speak as well. Oh, my goodness.
you better be careful, you'll have a doppelganger cartoon
I
character.
know. Okay, anything else? Final words? Thank you all. What was it that Max Hedren said at the end of, I don't even remember. I'm going to Google it tonight now.
I'd have to ask my kids.
Well,
I was-
Google it like a
I was
millennial.
too old to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, on MTV, is that what?
MTV, yeah.
I think he was on
Max Hedren.
Max, yeah.
And he was MTV, yeah. Oh, gosh. Gen X. All right, we are now in new business, 9-1. Proposed Resolution 31-2021, a resolution conditionally approving the Lawrence Minor Subdivision 2021 of property located at 479 Bowen Circle, Moab, Utah, 84532. Council, as we know, Laura forgot to do his due diligence, so it's in front of us again. Is there a motion?
I move to approve Resolution 31-2021, a resolution conditionally approving the Lawrence Minor Subdivision 2021 of property located at 479 Bowen Circle, Moab, Utah, subject to the conditions as outlined in our packet.
Thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. Discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Approval of bills against the city of Moab.
I move to approve the bills against the city of Moab in the amount of $421,598.82.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.